The world doesn't feel fake. It just feels distant, like you're living behind a thin layer of glass, watching your own life happen with a strange delay. You respond to people automatically. You smile when it's expected. You move through your day. But inside, there's a quiet that doesn't match what you're seeing. And the most confusing part is this: nothing bad really happened. There was no obvious collapse, no dramatic breakdown, yet something fundamental shifted. You wake up and your room looks the same, but it no longer feels the same. You check your phone and the notifications feel like noise. You open an old conversation and think, why did this ever matter so much? You play a song that once moved you deeply, and nothing happens. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't uplift you. It simply passes through. That's usually when the unspoken fear appears, the one people rarely say out loud. What if I never feel real again? Some describe this phase as emotional numbness. Others say it feels like living in a waking dream. But it's not a peaceful numbness. It's an alert emptiness, a quiet that watches itself. You're too aware to lie to yourself, yet too disoriented to know what to do with that awareness. And here's the part that makes it truly unsettling. This phase often begins after you think you've survived the worst, after the pain that cracked you open, after the chaos that pushed you into deeper questions, after the first sense that something inside you was waking up. You expect clarity. You expect light. And instead, you enter a kind of suspension. It feels like your inner world is on pause while life outside keeps playing. And that contrast creates confusion, fear, and a quiet sense of alienation, even when everything looks fine from the outside. If this is happening to you, hear this carefully. It doesn't automatically mean you're lost. And it doesn't mean you're broken. There is a specific phase of spiritual awakening, one of the most confusing, where the old psychological map dissolves, but the new one hasn't formed yet. Carl Jung understood this transition with unusual precision. He didn't romanticize it. He didn't call it enlightenment when it was still disorientation. Before wholeness, there is often a period where you no longer recognize yourself. This is where many people make a critical mistake, trying to go back, forcing emotion, forcing meaning, pretending nothing changed. And that's what traps them in limbo. Today, we'll approach this differently. I'll show you what this phase actually is, why it happens, and how to move through it without losing yourself. And more importantly, how to recognize the subtle sign that tells you this confusion is not a collapse, but a transformation in progress. Stay with me, because there is one almost invisible marker that reveals when integration has begun, even when nothing feels real yet. What makes this phase so disturbing isn't just how it feels. It's the fact that most people don't have a name for it. When something inside you has no name, the mind fills the gap with fear. You start wondering if you're regressing, dissociating, or quietly losing yourself. But in Jungian psychology, this state isn't random, and it isn't a failure by default. To understand it, imagine your psyche as a house you've lived in for years. Not a perfect house, but a familiar one. You know where everything is. You know which rooms feel safe. You know how to move through it without thinking. That house is built from your identity, your habits, your beliefs, and the roles you learn to survive with. For a long time, that house works. Then, without warning, it starts to feel too small. The rooms feel tighter. The air feels stale. Some doors no longer open the way they used to. Nothing is wrong, exactly, but something no longer fits. And slowly, almost quietly, the structure begins to loosen. In Jungian terms, this house represents the ego structure, supported by the persona. It isn't fake. It's adaptive. It helped you belong, function, and make sense of the world. But when the deeper self begins to emerge, the psyche has to reorganize itself. And here's the unsettling part. The psyche begins dismantling the old house before the new one is fully built. This is the moment people describe as nothing feels real. You're no longer inside the old structure, but you're not yet inside the new one either. You're standing in the open space between them. There are no walls to lean on, no furniture, no familiar reference points. That space feels like emptiness. But it isn't emptiness, it's unfurnished space. The mind hates unfurnished space. It wants clarity, certainty, something solid to stand on. So it panics. It tells you something went wrong, that you should go back, that you need to feel the way you used to. But Jung understood this phase as a threshold, not a collapse. You can't rebuild a house while still living inside every room. Some structures have to come down first. This is why awareness feels sharp, but connection feels thin. You're seeing more, but inhabiting less. Jung believed that true transformation requires a period of disorientation. Without it, change remains superficial. You might adopt new beliefs, new language, even new habits, but your core structure stays the same. Think of Peter Parker before he understands his Spider-Man. After the bite, nothing makes sense. His body feels different. His reactions are unpredictable. His strength appears at the wrong moments. He doesn't feel powerful. He feels unstable, confused, out of sync with the world around him. He doesn't wake up knowing who he is. There's a phase where his old identity no longer fits, but the new one hasn't stabilized yet. He's not fully Peter Parker anymore, but he's not Spider-Man either. And during that in-between, his life feels chaotic. His relationships strain. His sense of control collapses. That confusion isn't a mistake in the story. It's the story. The psyche works the same way. When a deeper capacity begins to emerge, the system destabilizes first. Awareness expands before control does. Energy shifts before direction is clear. And for a while, you feel less functional, not more. That's because your old operating system is incompatible with what's trying to come online. This is why the phase feels disorienting instead of empowering. You're carrying new potential in an old structure. And until the structure reorganizes, everything feels off. Jung understood this as a necessary threshold. You cannot step into a larger identity without temporarily losing your orientation. The spinning is part of the calibration. The confusion is part of the becoming. If Peter Parker had tried to go back to being who he was before, ignoring what was changing inside him, the story would have ended there. No integration. No transformation. The same is true here. This phase exists to slow you down, to stabilize what no longer fits, and create space for a true form to emerge, not all at once, but in fragments you learn to inhabit. This is why some people remain in limbo for years, not because this phase is meant to last that long, but because they keep resisting what it's asking of them. They try to return to who they were before the shift. They force clarity. They chase emotional certainty. They rebuild the old structure with new language and call it growth. But the psyche doesn't move forward that way. Think again of Peter Parker in that unstable phase, when his strength shows up at the wrong moments, when he's breaking things instead of saving them, when nothing feels under control yet. If he had decided, this is too confusing, I just want my old life back, the transformation would have stopped there. No mastery. No integration. No Spider-Man. What allowed the change wasn't understanding everything at once. It was staying present long enough for the system to reorganize itself. The same principle applies here. This phase exists to teach you how to inhabit a larger inner capacity without collapsing back into what's familiar. It's not asking for certainty. It's asking for tolerance of ambiguity. And this is where the most common mistake appears. The one that turns a temporary threshold into long-term limbo. The most common mistake people make in this phase isn't giving up. It's trying to go back. When the confusion becomes uncomfortable, The mind reaches for what's familiar. Old habits, old roles, old versions of connection. You tell yourself that if you can just feel the way you used to, everything will stabilize again. But this phase doesn't respond to force. In Jungian terms, the psyche has already withdrawn energy from the old structure. The identity you're trying to return to no longer has psychological fuel. So when you attempt to revive it, everything feels hollow, artificial, or exhausting. That's not resistance. That's incompatibility. Think again of Peter Parker during the early days of his transformation. When he tries to live exactly as he did before, ignoring the internal changes, chaos follows. His reactions don't match the situation. His strength leaks out in the wrong moments. The system isn't broken, it's misaligned. The same thing happens here. People try to force emotion by chasing intensity. They force meaning by intellectualizing the experience. Or they force stability by clinging to relationships, routines, or identities that no longer resonate. And for a short time, it feels comforting. You get a sense of control. You feel normal again. The anxiety drops. But underneath that relief, something tightens. The confusion doesn't disappear. It gets postponed. This is how limbo becomes chronic. Instead of allowing the psyche to reorganize, you interrupt the process. Instead of letting the new structure form, you keep reinstalling the old one. And each time you do, the system pulls you back into the same disorientation, often with more frustration than before. Another subtle mistake is over-explaining the experience, turning it into endless analysis, consuming content, collecting frameworks, naming the phase without inhabiting it. Insight without integration creates distance, not depth. Jung warned that consciousness alone does not heal. What transforms is lived experience, the slow, embodied adjustment of the psyche to a new center of gravity. This phase isn't asking you to fix the confusion. It's asking you to stop trying to escape it. Because the moment you stop forcing yourself back into who you were, the psyche can begin assembling who you're becoming. In the next part, I'll show you how this phase quietly reshapes your relationships, especially love, and why so many people mistake that shift for emotional loss. One of the first places this phase reveals itself is in relationships. Suddenly, the way you connect feels off. You may still care about people, but the emotional pull has changed. Conversations that once felt engaging now feel repetitive. Chemistry that once felt electric now feels thin. Even affection can feel distant, like it's arriving a second too late. This is where many people panic. They assume something is wrong with them, that they've become emotionally unavailable, cold, or incapable of love. But in most cases, what's happening is not loss, it's reorientation. During this phase, the psyche is reorganizing its center. And when the center shifts, the way you bond shifts with it. Before, love may have been driven by unconscious need, the need to be seen, chosen, reassured, completed. That doesn't make past relationships false. It makes them human. But as awareness deepens, the psyche begins to withdraw energy from bonds that were built primarily on compensation rather than alignment. This is beautifully illustrated in Eat, Pray, Love. At the beginning of the film, Elizabeth isn't broken, she's misaligned. She has love, stability, and a life that looks right on paper. But internally, something has gone quiet. The relationships no longer feed her soul, not because she's incapable of connection, but because the version of her that needed those dynamics no longer exists. So she leaves. Not to escape love, but to rediscover herself outside of it. That journey confuses the people around her. It even confuses her. She moves through phases of emptiness, detachment, and solitude. And from the outside, it can look like avoidance. But internally, it's integration. She's learning how to exist without clinging, how to relate without losing herself. This mirrors exactly what happens during this stage of awakening. When the old inner structure is dissolving, intimacy feels exposed, like trying to host someone in a house under renovation. There's no furniture yet, no clear boundaries, no stable center. So closeness can feel awkward, draining, or strangely hollow. Many people misinterpret this as emotional shutdown, but there's a crucial difference. In shutdown, you avoid connection because it feels unsafe. In this phase, connection feels confusing because it no longer follows the old rules. You're no longer satisfied with intensity without truth. You're no longer drawn to chemistry without alignment. You're no longer willing to abandon yourself just to feel close. This shift can feel like loss, especially if the people around you are still relating from the old level. You may feel out of sync, misunderstood, or strangely alone even in company. But this isn't emotional absence. It's emotional refinement. The psyche is redefining what love means when it's no longer rooted in lack. And until that new definition stabilizes, love feels quieter, slower, and less dramatic, but far more honest. One of the most dangerous misunderstandings in this phase is confusing transformation with dissociation. On the surface, they can feel similar. Both involve distance. Both involve emotional quiet. Both involve a sense of unreality. But psychologically, they move in opposite directions. Transformation expands awareness. Dissociation fragments it. During healthy integration, you may feel less emotionally reactive, but more perceptive. You notice subtleties. You sense patterns more clearly. You may feel quieter inside, but not collapsed. There's an underlying coherence, even if things feel unfinished. In dissociation, the opposite happens. Your awareness narrows. Your body feels distant or irrelevant. Time becomes distorted. You may feel detached not just from emotion, but from your own needs, hunger, fatigue, boundaries. Instead of clarity, there's fog. Instead of presence, there's avoidance. Jung was very clear about this distinction. He warned that when consciousness expands faster than the psyche can ground itself, the individual can become unmoored. That's why awakening without embodiment can destabilize rather than heal. So here's a simple way to tell the difference. In transformation, you feel confusion, but also curiosity. You feel distance, but also insight. You feel less driven, but more discerning. In dissociation, you feel numb without insight. You feel detached from your body. You feel increasingly unsafe or unreal. Another key marker is direction. Transformation moves you slowly toward coherence. Even when it's uncomfortable, there's a sense of inward alignment forming. Dissociation moves you toward fragmentation. You feel scattered, hollow, or increasingly disconnected from daily life. This is why grounding matters so much in this phase. Grounding is not regression. It's integration. Simple physical routines, sleep, food, movement, sunlight, anchor awareness back into the body so the psyche can reorganize safely. And this is important to say clearly. If the sense of unreality becomes intense, persistent, or frightening, seeking professional support is not failure. It's wisdom. Jung himself emphasized that individuation is not meant to happen in isolation. This phase is not about pushing through at all costs. It's about moving through with discernment. This phase doesn't resolve itself through force. It resolves through supportive conditions. Integration happens when the psyche feels safe enough to reorganize. And safety here doesn't mean comfort. It means stability. Something solid enough to hold you while your inner structure shifts. The first thing that helps is naming the experience without dramatizing it. Instead of telling yourself something is wrong with me, you learn to say, I'm in a transitional phase. That single shift reduces panic. It stops the mind from creating catastrophic narratives and allows curiosity to return. The second is bringing awareness back into the body. Awakening often pulls consciousness upward, into thought, observation, analysis. Integration brings it back down. Sleep, regular meals, hydration, walking, sunlight, these are not mundane details. They are psychological anchors. They tell the nervous system that it's safe to stay present while things change. Jung understood this well. He warned that when consciousness floats too far from the body, insight turns brittle. Grounding is what turns awareness into wisdom. The third is reducing noise. During this phase, many people overconsume information, spiritual content, explanations, frameworks, hoping one more insight will bring relief. But too much input keeps the psyche overstimulated and prevents assimilation. Integration needs silence, space, unscheduled time, not to isolate, but to let meaning settle. The fourth is dialogue with what's emerging, rather than fighting what's disappearing. Instead of asking, "How do I feel again?" you ask, "What in me wants to exist without pretending?" This can show up through writing, creative expression, or quiet reflection. The goal isn't to solve anything, it's to listen. Integration happens when the new center feels seen, not rushed. And finally, there's one small daily act of truth. Not a dramatic life change. Not a total reinvention. Just one honest choice a day. One boundary. One refusal to perform. One moment where you align action with what feels internally true, even if it's subtle. That's how the new structure begins to form. Brick by brick. Moment by moment. This phase doesn't end with fireworks. It doesn't announce itself loudly. And it doesn't feel like a sudden return to who you were before. The clearest sign that this stage is resolving is surprisingly subtle. You begin to feel real again, not intensely, not dramatically, but consistently. The world doesn't suddenly become exciting. Instead, it becomes inhabitable. Small things start to land. A conversation feels present instead of hollow. A quiet moment feels peaceful instead of empty. You're no longer chasing meaning. Meaning starts to appear in ordinary places. Carl Jung would say this is the moment when the psyche finds a new center of gravity. You're no longer trying to return to the old house. And you're no longer standing exposed in the open space between identities. A new inner structure is forming, not as an idea, but as a way of being. You notice your reactions are slower, but more deliberate. Your boundaries are firmer, but less defensive. Your emotions are quieter, but more honest. You don't feel high, but you feel aligned. This is what integration looks like. Not excitement, coherence. Not intensity, presence. Not certainty, inner permission. And perhaps most importantly, you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" You start asking, "What feels true now?" That shift marks the end of limbo. You don't go back to the person you were before the confusion, but you also don't remain suspended. You become someone who can hold complexity without disappearing inside it. If you want something steady to walk with while this integration unfolds, there are a couple of books that support this phase without turning it into pressure. The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer offers a clear way to understand what happens when the inner observer becomes stronger than the old identity. It helps you stay present without clinging to who you used to be. And The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown reminds you that much of this confusion arises when the psyche refuses to keep performing. It's about releasing shame, softening self-judgment, and choosing authenticity over approval, which is often the real work happening beneath this phase. You don't need to read them quickly. You don't need to fix yourself. Just let them accompany you while your inner structure settles. So if you're here right now, where nothing feels real, where love feels different, where your old identity no longer fits, remember this. You are not broken. You are not regressing. You are between versions. And that space, as uncomfortable as it is, exists for a reason. If this resonated with you, write in the comments, "I'm finding my way back to real." It helps anchor the process, and it reminds others they are not alone in it. And in the next video, I'll talk about the invisible test that often appears right after this phase, the one Jung believed determines whether awakening becomes wholeness or quietly fades back into sleep. Subscribe to Hidden Mind if you're walking this path consciously. You don't have to rush it. You just have to stay present long enough to become whole.